Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. By the way, please be sure to follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/UNC Knowledge. The best-selling author of America Alone, The End of the World as We Know It, Mark Steyn publishes regularly in National Review, The Washington Times, Investor's Business Daily, and in venues in Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom, a one-man Commonwealth Association, and he is a frequent guest host for Rush Limbaugh. Mark, the end of the world as we know it. First question, you mean that as a provocative overreach to get everyone's attention?
No, I think we are at the end. Like all Cassandras, you write a book warning about the apocalypse in hopes that you can ward it off. But I think whether we do ward it off or not, we are at the end of the post-World War II global order, and a lot of things have to be rethought as a consequence of that.
Segment 1, the numbers. Let's just lay out the demographic argument. I'll quote from America Alone. This book is about the larger forces at play in the developed world that have left Europe too enfeebled to resist its remorseless transformation into Eurabia, and that call into question the future of much of the rest of the world, including the United States, Canada, and beyond. The key factors are 1, demographic decline, 2, the unsustainability of advanced Western social democratic states, and 3, civilizational exhaustion. So we'll take each of those in turn. Demographic decline, the argument.
Well, Europe has simply given up, for the most part, having children. If you take the Mediterranean countries, for example, we tend to think of them in our stereotypical way as big, fecund cultures, big Italian mamas, big Greek mamas, my big fat Greek wedding,
right.
Big fat Greek loving family. In fact, they have collapsed birth rates. Germany, Japan, and Italy are already in net population decline. They have upside-down family trees. They have 4 grandparents with 2 children and 1 grandchild. That doesn't have to go on for a long time until you're in serious trouble and you reach a point beyond which you can't recover. And that's what a lot of European countries are at now. Now, some of them are just going out of business. If you look at Eastern Europe, some of the countries that were, until 20 years ago, part of the Soviet bloc, they gave up having children, and they're in population decline, and there's no successor population. What happened in Western Europe is slightly different. In effect, Western Europe imported a large Muslim population to be the children it couldn't be bothered having themselves.
And the Muslim birth rate is?
Well, the Muslim birth rate is said to be, because, you know, in a politically correct culture, they don't keep a lot of official figures on this, but compared to the average ethnic European birth rate, where they have 1.3 children per couple, the estimated Muslim population is 3.5. Now, the official British statistic from the official British Government Statistics Office says that the Muslim population of the United Kingdom is growing 10 times faster than the general population. That doesn't have to go on long for the numbers to even out. If you say I mean, people think it takes a long time, but if you say have a 90% population, let's not make it any kind of racial thing. Let's call them the Munchkins, say. Right. 90% Munchkins, and they have 1.3 children per couple, and then you have a 10% ethnic minority. You can call them the Ruritanians, call them whatever you want, but they have 3.5 children. That 90% and that 10% will have roughly the same number of grandchildren. So in other words, in two generations is all you need, and you've caught up. Yeah.
Right. Now you write in America Alone, I'm quoting you, today's high Muslim birth rates will fall, and probably fall dramatically, as the Catholic birth rates in Italy and Quebec have. Question, what is your underlying theory of what drives birth rates? Why would the Muslim birth rate fall?
Well, I think there's two kinds of things that drive birth rates. Right. One is it's basic kind of economic improvement. People move from a primitive agricultural society where you don't need large numbers of children to work the farm into more developed societies where you need fewer numbers of children. What's happened in Europe has gone beyond that, though. Mm-hmm. In effect, the social democratic state has said you don't need to worry about children or grandchildren or anything like that anymore. You're taken care of from cradle to grave. There's a relatively high price in taxation to be paid for that, and that's why having a child is expensive in the modern world today. So people have fewer children because it's an economic liability. So if you don't have to have them, why have them? 40% of German female university graduates are childless. We talk about the maternal instinct, but evidently it isn't that instinctive. Not if you're German,
French or German or Spanish. So, give me. By the way, this business about the Muslim birth rate falling, I have the feeling in reading America Alone that you almost toss that to the opposition, because even that need not necessarily be the case. As witness say in the Church of Latter-day Saints in Utah, Salt Lake City is a completely modern town,
right?
But it has the highest birth rate in the United States.
Yes,
that is to say, it's not necessary.
No, and that's why the Mormons have spilled the banks of Utah, and why Mitt Romney can be running as a Mormon candidate for president from Massachusetts. They've outgrown the state in a basic sense. And I think you can see similar things in Britain. For example, Pakistani immigration went down for the first Pakistani birth rates went down for the first generation of Pakistani immigrants in the 1970s. Something very odd happened then in the 1980s and 90s. That it started creeping back up again. In other words, as soon as there was a big enough Pakistani population in northern England to be able to live in a kind of Pakistani culture, they resumed Pakistani-style fertility rates. So I accept, and I concede that point immediately, that certain Muslim birth rates are falling. But which ones are they? They're generally speaking the more moderate ones. The Tunisian fertility rate is a Western fertility rate. In Turkey, why is Kemal Ataturk's Turkey turning into just another Islamist society? Because the Kemalist, westernized Turks have a Western birth rate, and that great vast Turkish rural hinterland in the east retained a traditional Muslim birth rate, spilled its banks, like the population in Utah, and moved into the cities. And that's why whatever happens to Turkey, Kemalist Turkey is dead, gone, over. And if the Pentagon and the State Department don't get that, they shouldn't be in those buildings.
Segment 2, the unsustainable habits of the West, again from America Alone. Quote, "The European welfare state depends on economic growth and population growth. The former is now barely detectable, and the latter is already in reverse." Close quote. Explain why the welfare state in Europe depends on both economic and population growth. First your premise.
Well, if you don't have welfare, a declining population is not a big problem. I mean, it's a problem in a kind of cultural sense, that you won't have a very hip pop music business if you've got very few young people.
Right.
But actually, personally, that would suit me just fine. I don't want a lot of young.
You and I would be happy with Frank Sinatra.
Yeah,
right.
I would be happy to have Doris Day and trade Lady Gaga to wherever she wants to move to. So if you lose your young people, you have certain cultural consequences.
Right.
But not necessarily economic ones. I mean, my town in New Hampshire, the population peaked in the 1810 census. And then what happened, the sheep farming industry in New Hampshire collapsed. People moved out to the west. People moved to the mill towns in southern New England. And my town's population declined all the way till the 1940 census. But it didn't matter, because we didn't have a welfare state predicated on the basis that there would be sufficient young people to pay for the retirements of the old people. Now, when we say retirement, by the way, we're talking about a problem that most societies before ours never had. If you look at Greece, something like the best part of 300 professions in Greece, you're allowed to take retirement at 50. 50. So in other words, you work from 20-something to the age of 50, and then you spend 3 decades living at somebody else's expense. Well, who's going to be that somebody else? If you don't have any children, you've got to import someone to be the somebody else, and the people that Europe decided to import were Muslims.
Almost every issue facing the European Union, I'm quoting again from America Alone, from immigration rates to crippling pension liabilities, has at its heart the same root cause, a huge lack of babies. Close quote. Give me a kind of summary statement, if you can, on why France, as we know it, can't survive under the current birth rate.
Well, it depends on what you think a nation is. If a nation is just a zip code, if a nation is a gate at LAX and it just happens to be an accumulation of the people who are standing around in the gate waiting for whatever until their flight is called, then yes, there will be a France and there will be a Netherlands and there will be an Italy and a Germany. But if you think that a nation is the accumulated inheritance of its past, then there will be no France, and there will be no Germany, and there will be no Italy. It's just a couple of days ago, a prominent politician in Angela Merkel's party in Germany called for the removal of crucifixes from German schools. Germans are post-Christian, like most of Europe, but it is part of their cultural inheritance that you will still see crucifixes displayed in German schools. This Muslim lady is making the point that this now...
the official was a Muslim?
Yes, this is a Muslim member of Angela Merkel's party in Germany, and she's making the reasonable point that these crucifixes no longer speak to what Germany is, and more to the point, what Germany will be in 20 years. So they're going to go. It doesn't even have to be anything that basic. If you look at British pubs, you look at the English village pub. Is there going to be a need for an English village? I mean, if you know English villages well from your university days, Peter. Right. You know, if you go to those villages in Oxfordshire, you'll have a tiny little main street on which there'll be 6, 7, 8 thriving pubs. Right. Now, once that population becomes 20, 30% Muslim, how many of those pubs are still going to be in business? So it affects everything. It transforms. You can't have this kind of population transformation without having a broader cultural, socio-economic, and political transformation too.
Okay, so let me tell you what I think of when I think of France. 1, nominally, but still nominally, Catholic. 2, rigid separation between church and state, the laïcité policy. 3, a vivid sense of having played a role in European history. Some sense, because the French educational system is pretty good at history as best I can make it out, the kids will understand Napoleon and the Revolution and the long line of French kings through Louis IX all the way back to Pepin. So they will place themselves in relation to the long story of European history. Give me what France will look like, how those 3 aspects of what I think of as French will be changed in 20 years, say.
Well,
or is 20 years too little? Am I taking...
No, I don't think so. I think in 20 years' time, I mean, just to take, you mentioned schools. I mean, if you take, for example, Antwerp in Belgium, 40% of the children in Antwerp elementary schools select Islamic studies as their religious studies class, versus 26% for Catholic and roughly the same number for non-confessional studies. So in other words, that is the future of Antwerp. So 20 years' time, all those grade schoolers are going to be in their late 20s and early 30s. So you're not wrong. That's the time frame we're talking about. And in France, most of those Catholic schools... most of those Catholic churches are going to be closed. Maybe some of them will be retained as heritage sites, but they're not going to be living Catholic churches. If you think of what was once St. Sophia's Cathedral in Istanbul, it's now a museum. So you can go and see you can go and see what was once there, but it's no longer a going concern, and that's what those Catholic churches will be like. You talk about the history that's taught in French schools. They're not going to be teaching the Second World War in French schools because it's going to be problematic. The
Turks were on the wrong side.
Well, and beyond that, the whole question of the Holocaust becomes contentious when you're teaching it to Muslim school children. That's why Dutch schools, for example, decide discretion is the better part of valor, and it's easier just to skip the whole Second World War. British schools increasingly find it's easier to skip the Crusades. So when you have this kind of essentially population transformation, it changes not only the present and the future, but it even changes the past, because the past has to be retrospectively brought into line with some kind of new national narrative.
Segment 3, civilizational exhaustion. Again, America alone. Quote, a suicide bomber may be a weak weapon, but not against a weak culture. Explain that.
Yeah, essentially Islam has bet that we have expensive